I was born in 1955 in California. My father was Italian. My mother was Russian and Lithuanian. And I grew up in California. When I was maybe 6 years old, I first started making sculptures. Usually animals, whales, dinosaurs, things like that. And I would melt all my mother's candles down and make things out of wax, little religious figures and anything. And then that all stopped, and I started playing music when I was 8 years old. I started studying the trumpet, and I played that for many, many years, and then later started playing the flute when I was a teenager, and then the piano, and the violin, and I wanted to be a composer. So I went to music school and I studied composition and counterpoint and harmony and all of that kind of stuff. And basically I found that the modern music, modern classical music didn't touch me, didn't touch my heart. That all the things I was learning was not really what I wanted to do. So I began playing Indian music because it was a completely different world. It touched my heart. There was something very magical about it. It was all based on improvisation, but there was definitely a science behind it, a deep science, and I wanted to understand more what that was. So I started studying Indian music, and it's a very intense training. You have to really practice for many, many hours a day. Sometimes I was practicing 12 and 14 hours a day, not doing much else than that. And through that, I started to look at myself, because that kind of music, it's a kind of meditation when you play it. You're practicing for many, many hours, and sometimes it's very repetitive, and you are basically watching your mind while you're doing it, watching your boredom, watching your urge to stop this and do something else. But you have to really do it. You have to just pour yourself into it and forget all that. So without knowing it, it's like I was starting the process of meditation. And very shortly after, I found a master of meditation. His name was Osho, and I went to India to be there where he was. And I stayed many, many months there in India, studying Indian vocal music with a teacher of music, and studying meditation with Osho. And like that, it continued for a few years. I would go to India when I had the chance and the money, and otherwise I would be studying music wherever I was. And then I started to live in the commune of Osho, and I worked as a carpenter. Meanwhile, I was doing music when there was festivals, and I was practicing 6 in the morning and midnight outside the hours of work. I was always doing that. And then my work took a very interesting change. I was making things out of wood. I became the personal carpenter for Osho for a while. I was making things for him. And then one day he asked me to make him something out of marble. I had never touched marble before in my life. And especially Indian marble, I'd never even seen it. And so he actually kind of pushed me to do it, that he wanted to have made furniture for his personal use. So he gave me this work to do, and it was, you know, you hear in like Zen monasteries the stories of the disciples. They are counting rice grains for years, and that's their whole work and their whole meditation. And looking at those rice grains all day long is just a mirror for the mind. You see everything projected onto that. Well, it was like that for me with the marble. It was such a different kind of work than music. With music, things happen immediately. You have instant realization of your thoughts and your feelings. Where with marble, it seemingly wouldn't change at all.
To your door, no shoes on my feet, looking for warmth, maybe something to eat. I asked for a friend, a hand I could hold. You gave me your love, was an ocean of gold. Chetana, Chet.
So this was a totally different kind of work for me. The marble, it was very hard and really, really pushed me beyond my limits of patience. Felt like I was going mad with that stuff, trying to make something, and it was breaking all the tools, and I was getting electroshocks from the Indian tools, and so this was really a different kind of work for me, the marble. I had to really, instead of it flowing like with music, I had to really change. It took everything I had, all the muscular power, all the patience, all the mental energy. I had to become like a steel tool myself in order to work that stone, and it was a totally different experience for me. Sometimes I was just at the limits of my patience. The tools would break, and I would be getting shocks from working with the water and the Indian tools, and
Its way to my soul.
And really it was like passing through a fire. And after many, many months, something changed inside me. Suddenly I started to drop my ideas of when things have to happen. That there's, I need to finish this by a certain time, or I have to hurry up and do this, or I have to finish this. Just forget all about that and just be with that stone in that moment. Only right here and right now, and forget everything else. And then it started to flow. And I found the way with it. And I started to really fall in love with the stone. It became like a beautiful thing, because when you work with the stone, it's like you change when you're working with the stone. It's like the stone is working on you. You get polished, you get carved, and it was like that. You get more empty, and it's like you're participating with this thing which is really, 60 million years old, made by the universe, and you're simply helping it to come into form, but it's already there. You're just giving it birth, in a way. So, after some years, when Osho left the body, and I wanted to leave India, I decided to come to Italy. I'd always wanted to come here. It was the land where my father came from, and I was always curious what it was like. So when I came to Italy, I immediately fell in love with it. There is so much art everywhere, so much to see and so much to learn. And I would go to Carrara and find marble in the rivers and start carving it. And I found a teacher near Siena with whom I lived many years, and he taught me design and drawing and painting and techniques of sculpture, and it was like a dream come true for me to learn these techniques from the ancient masters. And then during that time, my music had become at a level where I could share it with people, and I started playing concerts in different parts of the world, first in Italy, Germany, and then Japan. And then Japan opened my eyes to a totally different experience of art. In the Buddhist temples, there's simply thousands of statues of the Buddha, and every one of them is different, and every one of them is mysterious, and there's something in that art which you don't see anymore in art. There's something of egolessness in that art. You don't see a single Buddha statue with a signature on it. They're all made anonymously by a monk who was doing it as his prayer, as his meditation, or as his devotion. And there was something in those statues of that quality, that he was not doing it to aggrandize his ego, but actually to disappear. And it's a method to disappear as an ego. That really struck me very much about the art in Japan. And every time I would play in a temple, I would draw the statues and stay with them for hours and days and study them. To make a long story short, there was a parallel for me between what I was trying to express with music in my concerts, to create an atmosphere where people can enter inside themselves, to relax the mind and enter into the heart, and slowly to lose the speed of the thoughts and experience silence. So it was in Japan that I saw that in the art also. That was basically what was happening with the art, the religious art in Japan, the same movement. So it made a bridge for me between what I'm doing with music and with art, to create the same experience, an experience of silence for the person who is watching or listening. Because it seems to me in this modern society in which we live, this is what is suppressed, is the mystery of life. The fact that we're not just this material body or someone making money or whatever with many possessions. We are a spirit, and we're here to have experiences. And if you can experience that spirit inside yourself, it changes your life completely. And that is the whole purpose of what I hope to do, is with music or with art, just to give a little glimpse, even for a moment, that there's something inside us which is really beyond all the daily experiences we have, and which is just watching those experiences, and is really beyond it, and is really the real thing in us. So for me, painting is a natural. Painting and sculpture are not like two separate things. It's really, for me, it started with sculpture. That was more natural for me to start with 3 dimensions and to understand volume in space. But painting is simply another mode of expressing the same thing. There are some limitations to it, and there's some things which are better in painting. You can be more fantastic. You can be more in a dream. You can have things enter which are not logical. Whereas in a sculpture, you're pretty much fixed to that object in space, and you have to say everything contained in that object. But sculpture is in 3 dimensions, painting is in 2 dimensions, and you create the illusion of 3. It's not so different. These paintings here happened while I was living in Japan. I was living on the sea of Japan, just in front of the sea, and right next to the house there was a little temple of Kuan Yin, who is in Japan. She's the goddess of compassion. She gives divine love to the world to heal people. And so the more I lived there next to this little temple, the more I started to feel enveloped in that energy. And these paintings happened. This is Kuan Yin holding a lotus flower. This is the form of Kuan Yin with 11 faces on her head, and it's a symbol in Japan of the many forms of action that compassion can take. One doesn't just have to be like a Buddha sitting on a mountaintop to give compassion. One can also be working in the world in many different forms. And that's what this symbolizes. There's many forms of action, but she's giving this compassion, this kind of magic potion in this bottle. She's giving it to the world like light. And this is the same idea, but a little more elaborated. This waterfall of light is a symbol of that divine essence which is coming through her, being given to the world. Here's the same idea with a little more fantastic. The cosmos is behind her. And her face in this one is a little more Western. This painting here, on the contrary, happened while I was in Chile. I was staying just in front of a flaming volcano covered with snow, and a very powerful presence, this volcano. You could see the fire every night, and you could hear the rumbles of the earth nearby. So at the same time, the nature all around had this magnificent beauty, this feminine quality of nourishment and grace and beauty. So to me, this is a symbol of the energy of that volcano, like the energy of the earth coming out in the form of fire, creating new earth. And really, she's made of the same stuff as the universe. The stars and the moon, the light of the stars is coming from the bowels of the earth and coming out as fire. So that's that one. And music is like a kind of sculpture. Music is like you sculpt, and the medium that you're working in is time. The music proceeds through time. Whereas with a sculpture, the medium is space. You see the whole thing in one moment of time, but the thing unfolds in space. Whereas music, it unfolds through time, but the space is not in this dimension, it's in a dimension inside you. But they're all forms of sculpture to me. Or you can say they're all forms of music. We call them different names because it's more easy to talk about them, but it's really not so different to me. In the artists that have affected me the most in the past, I would say the first was Michelangelo, of course. He was my hero when I was growing up. And when I first came and lived in Florence, I used to go to see everything he did, to see the real thing, not just photos of it. And this was really wonderful to feel the energy of that man. What a creator he was. And the pieces of his which I came to love the most were those unfinished slaves that you see in the Accademia in Florence. They're like pulling themselves out of the rock, and they're still a part of the rock. And I love those very, very much. The way he knew exactly when to stop a piece, when it's not finished per se, but it's finished enough that your mind completes the image and it becomes more powerful. It's like you're participating in that statue. Then I was very much moved by the ancient Greek sculptures which I saw in the Louvre. I spent many, many days sitting on the floor of the Louvre drawing those ancient statues, nudes, usually without arms or heads, but perfect, really a sense of harmony and proportion and grace, and the grace of the feminine body, which totally touched me and changed my eyes. There's nothing of sexuality in those statues, but a pure, sensual and spiritual elegance, which I totally love, and which has affected everything I've done since then. Then Rodin was a great inspiration to me. I spent much time in his museum in Paris, and he was such a genius. He did things with sculpture which nobody thought of to do before him, putting things together in new ways and really drawing out the expression of each figure with the tension of the muscles and the drawing emphasis to something else and leaving shadows to accentuate the light. Then amongst modern sculptors, I would say Mitterrand is one that I love very much. He does these huge faces, or a part of a face. You see it in the courtyards of cities around Europe, and they're really fantastic. There's a power in his sculptures which is very impressive to see. And in the sense of design, or the sense of beauty, the sense of composition, the sense of harmony, music in art, I would say it's Leonardo who has taught me the most. I'm continually learning from him. His use of shadow and light, and sense of proportion, sense of composition is simply out of this world. As for the future, in this point I'm really finishing a cycle of about 15 years here in Italy. 15 years of study and work, and I was basically coming from a very classical direction. Really putting a lot of emphasis on the sacred feminine, the sense of the feminine in my art. And now I feel like this phase is completing now. It's kind of represented by how my life is changing. I'll be transferring my studio to Chile, where I live underneath a live volcano in front of a huge lake, and the nature there is very powerful. One really senses the power of nature there, and I feel that that's going to make a big change for me. It already has started to affect the things I'm doing. For example, this piece was inspired there, this kind of shamanic piece. This woman who is kind of flying into the sky on the wings of an eagle. I call it rebirth. And this was inspired by being there underneath that volcano. I had a feeling that so much of my past was falling away, many heavy weights that I had been carrying for a long time, and that it was the beginning of a new life, a new cycle in my life. And that's what this piece was saying for me. So as for the future, I don't know. It's wide open. We'll see what comes. from being in a new situation, in a new atmosphere. I can't say what will come.